That, you know,
We'll be starting up now.
Uh-oh.
Hello, my name is Dr. Tom Bennett, and I'm from Kean University and with the Battleship New Jersey Oral History Project. Today I'm talking with Mr. Val Pfeiffer, P-F-E-I-F-F-E-R, of Rowan, New Jersey, who served aboard the Battleship New Jersey from 1944 to 1946, and his duty aboard was as a talker on the signal bridge connected to the flag plot, Commander, 3rd Fleet. He had the rank of Signalman 3rd Class. Mr. Pfeiffer, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Anytime.
Thank you. To start off the conversation, I'd like to ask, how did you come to be involved with the Battleship New Jersey from the time you enlisted in the Navy until you got aboard?
That's always been one of life's mysteries, because I didn't particularly have a soft spot in my heart for any particular type, size, shape, ship or anything, but I would think that probably I had been trained as a signalman at the University of Illinois. The Navy took over some space there and took us in and started with basics, and from there went back to, I guess that's when they were selecting people, went down to the receiving station in Pearl Harbor. And slowly our gang unit became more active as far as having members. And unfortunately at that time we were in what was known as Tent City, and nothing but dust blowing around, and of course we weren't too happy. But slowly as it formed, we were curious to know who this commander of the 3rd Fleet was, because we were attached to him, and or going to be. And in trying to find as much information out as we could, two fellows who had some seniority in our group spent, one of them 17 years in the Navy. They volunteered to go up to headquarters and poke around and see what they could find out about who the commander of the 3rd Fleet was, and why they'd singled all of us out, because all of us had been signal trained. They came back after one or two times trying to find out what's going to happen to all of us. And in the meantime, more personnel was added to it. A couple guys would come in almost every day. And they were full of questions as well. But we found out where we were, who the commander of the 3rd Fleet was. And one of the first things I think that most of us kind of felt, if we paid attention to news and what's going on, was that this Admiral Halsey fellow was a fighter. He'll take you places where, looking back on it now in hindsight, you didn't think you had to bother being taken to. But it was interesting. He was interesting. He was not above talking to enlisted men, especially his own. And while we were never sitting having lengthy conversations about the universe or anything, he was a real person. That's the first opinion we got. As time went on, we found that some of the things that they said about the Admiral were factual. As I say, he wasn't above talking to enlisted men or what have you, but just passing conversation, nothing fancy.
What was your first experience? How did you first meet the Admiral? And first of all, tell us, what did you do with the Admiral? What was your duty for the Admiral? And then, what was your first experience, if you recall, in meeting him? How did he greet you?
My battle station, if we can call it that, was as a talker on a signal bridge. I had telephone line connected to me, and as near as I could find out, there was an officer down in flag plot on the other end of the wire. And the experience I had there was that he was an extremely impatient fella, because if I took a breath or something between what I was telling him had just happened, or what was bombed, or what ship did whatever, he was after me. What's going on? What's happened? What's that noise? And after a while, I fell into line. I didn't try to be objectionable or anything, or do anything but tell what I saw.
You mentioned that you were connected from the bridge to the flag plot. Explain to us what the flag plot is.
Flag plot is down where the flag officer, in this case, it's usually a flag officer is an admiral, and that's where they do all their plotting and planning and following whatever. They had little models of ships in a position, or sometimes it would have been just diagrams that were flopped on a table. And that was the way they were trying to keep abreast of what was going on without being up there seeing it firsthand. And I marveled to think that I was the guy that they were relying on for that sort of information.
How old were you at this point when you first started working for Halsey?
Well, I enlisted when I was 17, but I waited till I graduated from high school. I did graduate from Blair Academy, but once you were 18, you passed your 17th birthday and were 18, then you were draft fodder. And I didn't want to go any place that I didn't want to go to, as far as joining one of the branches of the service. So it was important to me to get to a recruiting station between graduation from school to my 18th birthday. And I made it with some time to spare. But I did that through the help of my father. And my father didn't pull strings to get me a posh job or anything, but we thought, the two of us, that if I had to go to a recruiting station, get the paperwork, do whatever there was, and then take it home and have one of my parents sign it, giving permission for me to go in the Navy, there's more time lost. So my father took a day off and went to the recruiter with me. And those fellows tried their best to get him to sign up too. But he kept saying, I'm too old, I'm too old. But that's where it started, and from there
May I ask, what made you pick the Navy versus the Army, Marines, Marines or Army or Coast Guard?
I guess mainly because of my exposure to sea scouting, sea exploring, whatever. Because I change the name now and then. I just thought that that was where I wanted to be. Of course, we'd seen some newsreels of ships and what's happening and where they're going and what they're doing. So I just kind of fell in line. And I wasn't sorry. I think that if I were picking destinations, I would have picked far more pleasant ones than those that we did get to, but it was experience and it was great. And when we found out who we were working for, to whom we were attached, and recently, last year or two, when I was down visiting the USS New Jersey, I was peppered with questions. What division were you in? And I said, well, I was not in a division. I wasn't attached to the ship. I was attached to Admiral Halsey. And everything that we had, all our clothes were re-stenciled instead of a name and division number. It said flag. And I didn't realize how much weight that carried until a few times it was seen somewhere or somebody asked about it, and we'd say, oh, we're attached to the flag of Admiral Halsey. And of course some guys wanted to know how that came about, and I can't to this day tell how it came about, why I was selected. And most of the other fellas who were in that same predicament had been to signal school with me. So that makes it nicer too, easier, because you know somebody, you know, you're not walking in by yourself to a strange situation. But that's the only thing I can say. That and my grades were good. It was a Class A school, and that probably had a little bit to do with it.
Let's go back to your work with Admiral Halsey. You talked a little bit about your work on the bridge. What else could you say about the Admiral? In working with him day to day, how did he deal with you as an enlisted man, a young 18-year-old enlisted man?
Well, as most of us know, whatever our assignments are, that's what we do where we are. And so it's a 24-hour coverage for a signal talker. Now that doesn't mean that that one person stays there for 24 hours, but that was my general quarters station. I had a telephone line that was connected to flag plot, and the wire that I had with me was about, I tried to estimate the size, length of it, about 100 to 120 feet long. And I was at the end of it, and flag plot personnel down there covered the other end with a recurring question: what's happening? What was that? And so it was time actually spent talking. I mean, I was reeling off whatever came in. And maybe this would be the time too to say that as operating with aircraft carriers, as they were planes were taking off from the carrier, signalmen on most ships were counting them. And when they recovered, they came back again. We counted again. And it was an unpleasant time when you had 25 planes take off and 17 come back. And but the reason for that was so that the admiral in flag plot would get the information almost instantaneously. Didn't have to wait for it to be sent or come from a carrier itself. And I am pleased to say that in every instance that, of course my memory may be fogged a little bit now, but it was the same number of planes took off, same number that we counted came back. So I guess we didn't do too bad a job on it. But it's a mystery how I landed in that position. Of course, people nowadays would say it's probably because I was really pegged. I mean, that's what I do, I talk. And I hope I don't become too objectionable in it. But as far as the Admiral, I can tell you a few little stories about him that are interesting. He detested, now a flag officer on any ship has a lot of push, a lot of pizzazz, a lot on the ball in general, the way we talk about it now. But he was an interesting fellow. Those who've been on the New Jersey, even though it's been changed around considerably since modernizing some of the weapons and changing locations for a few things, it was, well, that thought just left me. You can take that out. It was interesting because the Admiral would come up often at an odd time. And Admiral always had a Marine with him. No matter where he went, it was a Marine. And one of the many things that happens when an Admiral is moving around on a ship is that as he gets to a different area where a different division is working, doing whatever, someone must call attention so that all of the enlisted personnel stop what they're doing and stand quietly while the Admiral goes by. And he was notorious for his countermanding that order, if we call it that. He said, "Do you realize how many man-hours are lost in 1 hour if I move around this ship? Don't do it anymore." And of course that stopped. It wasn't the Marine calling it. It was whomever was in the area where they were. And slowly his wishes were complied with. But there was a situation where there was an ensign, and I don't remember all the details. But the ensign was in a spot on the main, at the main entrance on the main floor of one of the headquarters buildings. And whenever he saw, and he was in a line of vision with the door, and he saw Admiral Halsey coming, he would stand at attention and call attention, and everybody stops moving. And the admiral would always say to his orderly, his Marine, will you please go straighten that guy out? And the admiral would kind of watch, but he moved on. And of course, the Marine had the job of telling the officer that when Admiral Halsey came around, don't do that. He doesn't want it. And of course, so many of our habits are hard to break. And this fella continued. Didn't make any difference what it was, who said it or so. Until the day the Admiral walked over to his desk where he was standing at attention behind it and said, sit down, I want to tell you something. I understand that they've got some openings in some unsavory places for an ensign such as you. Now, if you want to go to one of those places, I can arrange it for you. If you stand up one more time, when I come in here, go pack your stuff because you're going. And of course, that isn't a very nice way to talk to a fellow officer. But it's the only way that he was able to convey his feelings. There were so many things actions that an individual could take upon coming upon a flag officer or anyone of importance. And it was a hard lesson to learn, but most everybody got it down pat, boy. It didn't take more than the Marine following behind the Admiral to say, don't do that again. And which was interesting, I thought, especially because he would show so many signs that he was human, that he had feelings, that he had things that we don't think they all do have. There was a situation one night, anybody who's been on the New Jersey knows that there is a glazed area forward of the signal bridge. And the Admiral always made sure that we understood that we could go in there when the weather's foul or in rough seas. No matter where you are out in the open on a ship, you're going to get drenched eventually. And he would always say, come on in here where it's you're protected a little bit, because there were glass windows that were in place most of the time. The only time that they weren't, we had to run like banshees to wind those windows down so that they were going to be protected when they fired any of the guns. And he usually didn't have too much trouble getting his way. He was interesting, and if he'd come anywhere near you, say, good evening, how are you? What are you doing up here now? Or something. He was alive. And most of us felt that the name that was given to him by those who sailed with him was true. He was a sailor's admiral. Now, I don't mean that he was down on his hands and knees shooting crap or anything else with anybody, but he was an interesting guy. And he wasn't above responding if you said good evening, sir, or good afternoon, or something. And I mentioned that glazed area that was enclosed in windows forward of the signal bridge. There was a swivel chair as far back on, or as close to the door going into the glazed area. And that's where the Admiral usually sat. Now there was one on each side, starboard and port. And it was understood that that's there for the Admiral. And one night, of course, during combat there are no lights on. When the sun goes down and it becomes dark, it's dark. And that's when you relied on the little phosphorus type buttons on stanchions and on doors and on anything, so you didn't walk into it and knock your brains out maybe. And a Marine had been up in the, and the weather was foul, was nasty, had been up in that englazed area, and he was sitting in the swivel chair. And two of us were there, and we were just chatting. Now, you say you're in something when you're supposed to be on watch. Well, we could see everything. You can see through windows, you know, so we weren't worried about that. But the Marine was called below for whatever reason. And a steward came up, and most of the stewards were all Filipinos. And they took care of the meals for the officers and whatnot. And he said that the Marine was, they're looking for him down below. And he jumped up and left. Well, the other fellow who was standing there with me before jumped into the seat vacated by the Marine. And I do have to say that the Admiral usually was always wearing a hat. Now, a lot of times he had an old, what we used to refer to as an engineer's hat on any railroad. And he felt comfortable with that because it had a large peak and he could pull it down and shade him from the sun. And this night he had an overseas hat on. And so he came, opened the door, walked in, and the fellow who had, signalman who had sat in the chair vacated by the Marine, sounded off by saying, if you think you're getting this seat, you've got another thing coming, because I have it now. Assuming it was the Marine who had an overseas cap on. And this deep resonant voice, half laughing, said, that's okay, son, I'll sit in the one on the other side. And that poor signalman was shocked. He said that to the Admiral, who was supposed to have the seat, you know, whenever he wants. And all he kept asking me was, what in the world can I do? What can I do? Why did I say anything like that? They don't really look like each other, but, you know, oh, I'm so dumb. I said, well, then be undumb. The only thing you can do is go over and apologize. And, yeah, but gee, I don't want to go. I'll go with you. Come on, we'll walk around that side. So, no big hardship. And he did, and he excused himself, and said, "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't recognize you, and I would never say anything like that. You know, I don't. That's not my seat. That's your seat." And the Admiral, smiling at him, said, "Well, I tell you what, son. Don't ever do that to an ensign." And he said, "Go on. You want to sit down over there? Fine. Go on." And that gives you an idea of what his temperament is. He is a fighter, and that's why Admiral Nimitz always made sure that he had some destination for him to go, because he'll go right in where he's supposed to. But that's one of several things that gave us an indication of what kind of person he was. And we had inspection. Now we're getting ready to leave. When we went aboard the New Jersey, we went more or less individually, or a few at a time. And we went in what used to be known as Liberty boats, which are a good size. They got a good size engine on them. And we had all our earthly possessions with us in a sea bag. And we went over to the side of New Jersey to the accommodation ladder. Now, it isn't the easiest thing to do to climb up one of those ladders on the side of the hull of the ship with a sea bag under your arm or over your shoulder. And we all survived. We didn't lose anything. But in leaving, when the Admiral of the Third Fleet left, Third Fleet left, and the Seventh Fleet, Admiral Spruance, took over, it's interesting to see that the accommodation ladder chore we thought we were going to face was non-existent, because the transport that was going to take us to wherever our destination was in the future came alongside, and the rails on both ships dropped and we stepped across. Everybody in his flag allowance. We're the only ones being transferred. And many of the ship's company people who were there and witnessed that were shocked. How in the world transport comes next door to pick you lousy guys up? What are you doing? You know? But those are the things that he would do to show that he was a real person. And he didn't have to be prompted or say, "Oh, by the way, I think it happened."
What did you see the relationship between Admiral Halsey and the captain of the New Jersey? Was it a good working relationship? Did the captain feel put upon having a fleet admiral aboard, or?
I don't think so, not with him. And in many cases, I always felt that they knew each other anyhow. They probably had met, had been at affairs, not social necessarily, but any kind of a thing, so that it wasn't strange. But there was no animosity demonstrated either way, and it wouldn't be either way. But he was, in my opinion, he was well thought of as a person. And it was nice to see that.
You mentioned that Admiral Halsey was considered a fighting admiral. Could you talk a little bit about Admiral Halsey as a fighting admiral? What displayed that? How was he recognized for his prowess?
Well, he would, at his behest, we felt, would go as planned if the weather was foul, if there was a time frame that he had to adhere to. We went, didn't make any difference what it was. And he had been known as a scrapper in Annapolis. He was into boxing. And often people think that's what I mean when I say he's a fighter. He would go, take whatever situation there was, and work out a way to get there, to do what it's going to do. Now, there were a couple instances, and I can't bring them all up at this minute, but when we were in a dangerous spot, by that I mean the enemy wasn't too far away, and we would still go because that's what he has to do. That's what we're going to do. We're going to make a name for ourselves here. And that wasn't uppermost in his mind, I don't think, although I've seen some writers who have alluded to that he's going to go there. Come hell or high water, he's going to be where he's supposed to be.
How about the Battle of Lady Gulf? There he was sometimes criticized for going after one of the three strike forces that the Japanese were sending down. He went after the wrong one. In his autobiography, he says, "I made the best decision I could at the time."
That's right.
Based on, you participated in that.
I was there with him.
And first of all, do you recall him, obviously he may not have discussed it with you, but do you recall any of the decisions made and actions of Lady Gulf? And based on your knowledge of the Admiral, do you think he made the right decision or not? So first of all, what was it like to be there during the movement of Lady Gulf?
Well, it was scary. Knowing what where we were, and I think that there comes a time, and depending on, we all have that experience, I'm sure, depending on who is in authority at the time, a decision is made and we're taking action, going in that, following that decision. There was no, of course we would choose far more happier destinations, but that's where we're going, and this is the fellow who made the decision, and hindsight is a waste of time very often. But at the time, the message that he received was that what he did would have complied with it, and it was the way it should be. Now, there have been discussions about it being an erroneous decision, that he was glory happy. He didn't give any signs of that. It wasn't of, because a personality usually gives away the secret. You know, boy, I'm going where I wanted to go. Something of that sort. Yes, he was going where he wanted to go based on the information he had. And the sad part about that, in one way, aside from his difficulty and people accusing him of things and so on, we went through a typhoon. to go up Lady Way. And most of us, when the Admiral made the decision to turn around, thought we were going through another typhoon, that he must have had inside knowledge because he could do it twice. But it was the same typhoon we'd been through earlier. And those are unpleasant cruising conditions. And of course everybody tried to make much out of that whole situation. And the little bit that most of us enlisted men knew about what had happened, we had no accusatory thoughts toward the Admiral.
Now, was that the typhoon where I think 3 destroyers were lost and something like 780 or 90 personnel were lost on the destroyers? Yeah.
Yep.
So the men, as far as you could sense, didn't believe that the Admiral had made a mistake. It was just the luck of the draw, the weather caught you at the wrong time.
Right. And some of those weather conditions were just downright scary. And my only, during one of the storms, and we ran into a few now and then, being the talker on Signal Bridge, I had to cover both sides of the ship. And that's the reason for having a long wire. And, well, most of the fellows knew in the signal gang who, or that there's somebody attached to that wire, so don't stand on it and think you're playing tricks on them. And I was on the port side of the ship, and we were weathering a storm, and the deck was soaked. And there are some people today who don't realize that the deck on the New Jersey was teak wood. It's a wooden deck. And the sailors on that ship periodically would go out and holystone it. And that's an occupation that none of us ever looked for, because there's a brick-size stone, and it has an indentation, a hole in it. Not the hole all the way through, but by taking a broom handle or a swab handle or something, putting one end in that hole, bending over and grasping that handle in the required manner, you would slide that stone back and forth, which in effect was sanding off a little of the top area of the wooden deck. And but you did that in a line with other sailors. So that's another interesting little chore that you can do to pass the time away.
Now, the battleship New Jersey was in a number of actions against Japanese forces, and it protected the aircraft carriers and so on.
Yes.
What were some experiences you had during Japanese air attack?
Between being suffering, I guess I'd say, from a case of fright. You know, what in the world is, what if one of those things hit here, we wouldn't be here. And but you don't really think about that as much. I didn't, I couldn't, because I had a guy bothering me on that telephone constantly saying, What's going on? What was that noise? What was that? What happened? What's happening? And I thought I was doing a fair job of telling him what was happening. And that I decided, for personal reasons, that they're bombing on the starboard side of the ship. I'm on the port side. I'm sorry. But it was one of life's experiences. I can talk about it, some of those now, and if I'm not talking to anyone who has been on a ship, a Navy ship, during similar circumstances, or knows anything about sailing, I'm just making a lot of words, because unless you've experienced some of those things, you have no feeling for them. And which is natural. You know, if you haven't experienced it, you're not going to be able to say, boy, I'm going to hightail it out of here. But I guess the same as most of the crew, the signal gang anyhow. We've all experienced things that we don't talk about too much for a lot of reasons, I guess. Doesn't do any good. But if you're talking to someone who has never experienced it, it's lost anyhow. They may want to make notes on what you've explained, but that's about where it ends.
So what would you say to somebody? What would you like somebody to take notes on? How close did the Japanese planes come to you? What did you exactly see? What did you observe and feel?
What we saw, the planes who were dropping bombs are, and I can't think of all the types the Japanese had, but you told what you saw. That was a close one. The vision may not be too good tonight because they're not anywhere near any of our ships, and of course you don't want them to be. But you just keep going with whatever you could in your own mind was happening, and if there was anything close that was threatening, most of the people who were on that side of the ship or wherever it may have been saw the same things you did, so you didn't have to talk about it. We could tell the guy down below who didn't see it, but that's about it. There were a lot of scary things. And being young and having experienced them before, hey, that's the way it's supposed to be. But all we did was try to keep everything factual. During most of the time, daylight time, we were counting our own planes that took off and those that landed. If we were attacked at that time, we tried to put in words what you saw. And that's all you can do.
What was Admiral Halsey like during close combat like that? How did he react to it? Was he calm, concerned, nervous?
I have to be honest, because I was up on the main deck telling the people in his area what was going on. And he was never extremely excitable. He expected to be attacked one way or another. And he tried to give anybody around him the same feeling. You know, it's going to happen, so you don't worry about it. Hey, it didn't hit, it landed over there. You're all right. And I don't think that he was extremely a showman type, but we all have our own opinions of everybody.
How did Admiral Halsey feel towards the ship New Jersey? He started out as a destroyer officer, then carriers. He helped launch Billy Mitchell's raid against Japan. As I read his autobiography, he didn't seem to have a lot of warmth for the New Jersey. He had it for the destroyers.
Well, that was his first love.
Mm-hmm. Destroyers were.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And they were small compared to the New Jersey. They were maneuverable. At a moment's notice, they can change their course and go in a different direction. It took a little more doing to move a big ship the same way. And he never showed in any way that he was dissatisfied with where he was, what he was doing, the ship. I never heard anything, and I wasn't always in earshot of him, but never heard or saw anything that was contrary, or that he didn't like the ship or whatever. I'm sure that he voiced an opinion, and those who were in close contact with him, officers, whatever else, probably may have heard something that was worse than what we thought. But as far as I know, and a little bit that I had been around him, and it's a little bit really, you know, where's a signalman third going to be in comparison to a four-star admiral? And but yet he never made a distinction. He ate with the enlisted men on and off now and then. He would be in line, and the chow line, that is. And of course everybody wanted to step aside and let him go first. No, that's okay, son. You're hungry too, or you're anxious to get this shoe leather yourself, so I won't hold you up. But it was things, situations, I guess, such as that, that caused a lot of us to form the opinions we have. And it was interesting. I don't know whether we could build a bridge on all the things that we heard, saw, witnessed in one way or another. But I didn't see anything that was out of the way. And I'm prejudiced, okay. But it was interesting to see the weight that that time my boss had without being present. All you had to do, we were, I mentioned that we were in Tent City. We had no mosquito netting. We had no amenities for better living. It was dusty, and the wind always had a way of giving us a couple toots when it shouldn't have. But he was, well, he lived up to the reputation that we found out about long after we left the ship, that he was in favor of all the ship's crew, not just the officers. One of those little thoughts just came almost into my mind, and then it ran away again.
We'll stop
But there were things. But